welcome to this Friday edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. A rainy Friday afternoon for us down here. Might be some concerns when it comes to flooding from the Rio Grande, but we will let you know more about that on Monday after the storm has passed and we've had a chance to gather the information on that. Before we get to today's headlines, I did want to tell you that you can stay informed on the stories shaping the U.S. Mexico border because Border Report Live is now bringing you real-time updates, expert insights, and voices from both sides of the border in audio podcast version. So if you're on your commute home, or maybe you're at the gym or taking the dog or the kids out for a walk around the block, you can listen to us now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the iHeartRadio app. Got a great show for you today. Our Sandra Sanchez, South Texas correspondent, did a couple different ride-alongs with the U.S. Coast Guard on the Rio Grande and in the skies above the Gulf. So we're looking forward to hearing from her on both those trips. We're also going to hear from our Salvador Rivera, San Diego correspondent, and he's going to talk a little bit about what the Coast Guard is doing on his side of the border out there in California. But first, let's take a look at some of the headlines making news across the border, starting with demonstrators gathering outside a Home Depot in Monrovia, California, after a man was killed when he was hit by a vehicle while fleeing from an immigration and customs enforcement operation on Thursday. The Monrovia Police Department told local media that a man ran away from the Home Depot store as ICE agents approached. He then ran onto the multi-lane 210 freeway where an SUV driver hit him. He was taken to a local hospital where he later died. Now, Monrovia is about 20 miles northeast of downtown Los Angeles. Demonstrators chanting and holding signs outside the Home Depot where the man reportedly took off from. DHS told the Los Angeles Times that the man was not being pursued by DHS law enforcement. Also happening, President Trump's border czar Tom Homan said today that the administration is not asking the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department to directly enforce immigration laws. He also added that they must cooperate with federal authorities. Now, Homan's comments come after Attorney General Pam Bondi was looking to roll back the district's sanctuary policies around undocumented migrants. This includes lifting the block on local police cooperating with immigration enforcement. The nation's capital sued to block President Donald Trump's takeover of its police department in court this morning, hours after his administration escalated its intervention into the city's law enforcement by naming a federal official as the new emergency head of the department. In other news, in South Texas, right here where we're from, a madam from Mexico has been sentenced to 6 months in a federal prison. Now, back in April, Jacqueline Rios Garcia de la Cadena brought 2 women across the border. Rios had booked the women flights from McAllen, Texas, up to Houston, where federal authorities say they planned to work as prostitutes. Now, officers at the Hidalgo-Reynosa International Bridge arrested Rios, and she pleaded guilty to a federal prostitution charge. Now, there was no evidence she forced the women. One of them actually told CBP officers that we are going to Houston, we are going to be prostituted for approximately $1,500, end quote. During a hearing this morning, Rio said that she didn't think about the consequences of her actions and was remorseful, yet a judge did sentence her to 6 months in prison. Now it's time to get to our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, to talk about the ride-along she did along the Rio Grande. This was last week, right, Sandra?
Yeah, it's been a busy couple of days. We rode on a boat on a cutter with the U.S. Coast Guard crew up the Rio Grande.
Yeah, and I can't lie. I was incredibly jealous when you told me you were doing this. But one of the things that I found interesting was as someone who lives and reports and works down here on the border, didn't realize the Coast Guard is actually getting in on immigration enforcement. Can you give us some background on what it is they are doing based on what you can tell us?
Yeah. And actually, when I posed that question to them, they were a little shocked. But you're absolutely right. Here on the border, we are used to seeing Border Patrol boats, fish and wildlife boats go up and down. We are not used to seeing Coast Guard go up and down the Rio Grande. As you know, and I know, the Rio Grande is only about 20, 30 feet deep. They are launching from mission. And I ran into them the day I was doing a story on the National Defense Area, signs being put up. I saw Coast Guard launching in a vessel, and we talked about it. So, I requested a ride-along. They were so welcoming. the cameraman that we just saw getting a Kevlar vest put on and a PFD over, and this was triple degree heat. Rolando Avila here from KVEO, we went together and they had 2 boats. So we were able to film side by side. In our boat, there were 8. And let me tell you, the guns that they were packing were amazing. And the Chief Petty Officer, Andrew Werner, was so forthcoming. You know, what they're doing is they're assisting Border Patrol. They are searching the river for cartel, for nefarious activity that could be happening. We know that happens there. They're calling items in. They're also assisting with rescue, search and rescue, and helping people if they're drowning. And that happens a lot more than you and I would know. And, you know, they are also have the ability to pursue and be part of a law enforcement activity as far as if they see some criminal activity happening. So actively enforcing nation's border laws right here. And the Rio Grande is the border, you know, right there. The other shore is Mexico.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting. You know, it makes sense. They're maritime law enforcement officers. It's what they're trained to do. It's what they're good at. So, what was the biggest thing, I guess, that you took away from the experience with them?
Yeah, actually interesting. So as you know, the numbers have come out. We're at historic lows for crossings, apprehensions, encounters by Border Patrol, Customs, and Border Protection along the southwest border. What that has resulted in is more Mexicans coming to the river and enjoying the river. Now, we did not see anybody on the U.S. side, but there are 2 parks. There's an Ansel Duas Park on the U.S. side. There's an Ansel Duas South Park. And on the Mexican side, there were, I want to say, hundreds of people. They were picnicking, they were swimming, they were camping, they were wading, waving, lots and lots of fishermen. And then upriver, we saw some really, you know, tremendous homes on the river where they were having parties on the Mexican side. Cows were drinking from the river. I mean, it was just like a party. Everybody was coming to the river. And what that does is it makes it harder for Coast Guard officials to determine who might be a spotter, who might be part of the cartel. In the past, really, there was nobody coming to the river, especially the fishermen. They were really scared to come. And so now they're saying, although, you know, we're glad the numbers are down, we're glad that people feel safer. They also did a huge shout out to Mexican officials for really cleaning up the river, pushing the cartel further south. We know they're still there, but, you know, they said what it's done is it's brought more people, and now we don't know who's a bad guy and who's not a bad guy. So, you know, it used to be I would go to the river working on a story. I would be on one side, and somebody would light a lighter across from me on the other side, and that was a telltale sign that the cartel was, you know, that was literally a spotter. Somebody saying, I'm there, but I'm on the U.S. side. So they, you know, they had eyes on me. Now you have no idea. So I thought that was the biggest crazy takeaway I had from that ride.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you say that. I remember one of the first stories that I ever worked on when I moved back down here to the Rio Grande Valley was laser pointers. And I'll talk about Roma Police Department specifically. Roma police officers were having laser pointers shined on them from across the border. Now, for those of you that have never been to Roma, Texas, it's kind of a drop off of a big hill there. I won't necessarily
Cliffs.
call it a cliff. It's kind of a cliff.
Cliffs,
Yeah, they are cliffs. But on the other side of the border, it's kind of, you know, it's, again, kind of a build up a hill to where there's homes and different businesses. And the thing that stood out to me about that story is if you've ever tried to shine a laser pointer from any distance, you know, that thing is bouncing all over the place. You just can't keep your hand steady enough for how fine of a light emitting diode that is. Excuse me. But in this case, those officers, they had laser pointers being shined on them, and they were still, which, you know, begs the question, were they on some kind of tripod or some other, you know, piece of equipment or machinery, perhaps a weapon that they were attached to on a tripod? So, you know, that's a big difference, you know, seeing those more people coming down and, you know, enjoying the water in these areas.
Yeah, and absolutely. And of course, you know, Coast Guard has always assisted with search and rescue. And we've talked about this before. One of the tactics the cartel have used, and this has dropped off some, is they tend to send young boys, 7, 8, 9-year-old boys across the river with a rope. The boys hook it on a tree, and then they come back to Mexico. And then the line of people hold on to the rope and they cross. Now, if Border Patrol or somebody comes along at the time that the boys are, hoisting this rope up, they just basically abandon the boys. The boys sometimes drown in the river as they're coming back because the cartel no longer hold them from the Mexican side, right? They just let go of the rope and everybody runs, and the boys have drowned. And Border Patrol has time and time again plucked them out of the river. So, the Coast Guard is there. They're looking for anyone who may be trying to cross, who is in distress, who needs help. And it was interesting. There were several children who were playing off the side where the park was, and they were yelling for the boat to come closer. They wanted the wake. They wanted the waves so that they could play on the waves. And they weren't really, going to go close. That's not what their mission was. And they said, yeah, granted, not everyone is happy to see them, but it seems like they had good intel back. They work, they communicate, they work with Border Patrol, with the other agencies. And the other big takeaway I took from this is, and Salvador will address this too, is that the U.S. Coast Guard, they just doubled their budget with fiscal year 2026. They're going to get $25 billion. They are emerging as playing a much bigger role in border security than we have ever known that agency to be. In the flight that I did, and I know we'll talk about that later, the lieutenant commander I spoke to said they're the little agency that has always done the most with the least. They're multitaskers. They're not really that recognized. Stepchild might be a word that, came to mind. And they're kind of proud of that. But, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem really wants this agency to step up. Interestingly, it's a service, but it's under Department of Homeland Security, excuse me. It is not under the Defense Department. And so she's really pushing their activity. They're, putting them forefront. And there have been time and time again several congressional hearings talking about this emerging role that she envisions them playing. And what I'm seeing here on the border is that is coming to fruition.
Yeah, and it's very interesting too because, like you said, they have so many different hats that they wear. I remember myself, my last tour in the Middle East when we were leaving Iraq at the end of 2011, at the end of Operation New Dawn. The people checking our stuff acting as customs agents coming back from Iraq on base were actually Coast Guard. There was Coast Guard sailors there taking care of that. So, I mean, they wear just so many different hats. But you did mention our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera, and I wanted to bring him in now because you also have spoken with the folks on your side of the border. Fill us in on that.
Not too long ago, the Coast Guard invited the media from both sides of the border to come along, tag along, get on a boat out in the Pacific, in the harbor, to show us, to give us a realistic look at what they're doing in terms of interdictions, interventions out on the water as they try to keep drugs and human smuggling as low as possible. We were given a look at how they use their guns sometimes. They have to approach boats to get them to stop, to get them to surrender. It's a dangerous job, something they're doing 7/24, and something they're doing more of in the last 6 months when they have stepped up their efforts. In fact, Coast Guard official was telling us that about last 6 months or so, they have tripled the resources on the water off San Diego and California, trying to stop unlawful migrants, drugs, and they're working with agencies such as personnel from the Air and Marine Unit with Customs and Border Protection. The Coast Guard also has its own boats. They try to help. They go and interdict people. They call the Border Patrol to help out. Again, this is happening 7/24 off the coast of San Diego, California, stopping pangas. Not just pangas, but they often find migrants on surfboards, on jet skis, on larger boats, even on yachts. So this is a very difficult job. They try to stop the migrants before they reach a beach in Southern California, and they start running for it, so to speak. Coast Guard saying that this is something that they are doing more and more of, although the interdictions are holding steady. They are telling us that in 2025, they have had, this is about numbers for about 2 months ago, was 260 interdictions in the water. In 2024, there were 561 interdictions. Now, for the most part, Coast Guard uses the smaller boats that tend to move really fast. They go as fast as 50 miles an hour on the water. And that's the sort of the primary line of defense here off the coast of California. And as Sandra was mentioning, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem is asking for up to $25 billion for the Coast Guard to buy more helicopters, more Coast Guard cutters, more fixed wing aircraft, for personnel, for resources, as they plan on doing more interdictions on the water here of California. But again, the numbers are fairly flat, where we have seen a lot fewer crossings, encounters on land. On the water, they are remaining steady. Again, the numbers for 2025, there are about 260 so far. Last year, there were 561. Kristi Noem is saying we're gonna use the Coast Guard a lot more. It's a valuable resource, and we're gonna put them out there working with the Navy, with Border Patrol, and other U.S. resources on the water off the coast of California.
Yeah, those are some shocking numbers, Salvador. I mean, when we were talking last week about the numbers of folks crossing in between the ports of entry down here on the land borders and through the Rio Grande, those numbers have, dropped so dramatically. But it seems like, we are on pace to meet, if not the same numbers for the Coast Guard in the coming year. So it's very interesting stuff. You mentioned that some of their boats go up to 50 miles an hour. How does that compare to when you rode along with Border Patrol not too long ago?
They have very similar crafts, boats. They're using the same type of boats, and they are fast and they move. And the water, even when the water is rough, they cut right through those waves and they almost go flying. You're sitting there and you start to go up and down as they're going. But they need these boats because these smugglers have their own vessels that are also pretty fast as they try to get away. Sandra mentioned weapons on board. They have this special type of shotgun that they use. And once they get into this cat and mouse game where the migrants on the boats with the smugglers aren't giving up, eventually Border Patrol, Coast Guard gets close enough, and without endangering the people on the boats, they shoot the engine. They dismantle the engine, and that's how they finally get them to stop. But that is the last recourse. They try to get them to stop, but when the smugglers refuse to do so, that's when they have to resort to using their weapons to get the boats to stop, to disable them on the water.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Salvador. We appreciate you being here to share that with us. Stick around, because Sandra Sanchez is sticking around. Not only was she on the water, but she was in the skies, too. We'll have more after the break. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. And welcome back to Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas. And joining me now, because she was just been all over the place the last week, our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez. Sandra, tell us a little bit about this ride-along you took up in the air.
Yeah, we flew for 3 hours last night, actually, with a different Coast Guard crew out of Corpus Christi Air Base. And we went over the Gulf, and they do these 4-hour nightly patrols in this twin-engine plane. It was led by Lieutenant Commander Landon Elliott. And this crew is based in Corpus Christi. You know, what was really fascinating, of course, they do search and rescue. That's what the Coast Guard is known for. But they are now looking for some of the mentions of the boaters, the fishermen that are illegally poaching that Sal just mentioned. They're called lancheros here. They have these boats called lanchas, and this plane takes off every night loaded with this incredible radar equipment. They can spot a can of Coke from 40 miles out.
Oh, man.
And they take pictures of it. It's
Talk about eye in the sky.
so sophisticated. We were not allowed to actually film the equipment. I saw the equipment. We were not allowed to take images of it. We could take some images of the men operating it, and this was an entire 5-man crew. There are ladies who do come on board, but last night it just happened to be all 5. And there they are operating this equipment. It actually connects to the aerostat tethered off of South Padre Island called Argus. That's the aerostat that broke free and actually flew 600 miles to Dallas a few months ago in April, right? Well, Argus is back up transmitting, and they use this communication to help them as they're trying to locate what's out there on the water. here's the most interesting part about it is the Mexican cartel have apparently moved into poaching red snapper from U.S. waters. What they're doing is they're crossing the maritime boundary line, which, I asked them, how do they know? Because it's water. How do you know what's Mexico, what's U.S.? And Commander Elliott told me the fishermen know. If they're over a half a mile or a mile, okay. But when they're 18 to 70 miles north of the line, they clearly know. And what they're doing is they're putting these things called long lines. They are like 1,500 feet. And they're putting them in the water, and they're poaching this red snapper because the fish are apparently more prevalent north. Just last month, while we're looking at this video, I wanted to show you, they opened this back hatch for us. I actually stood on it as it was opened and talked into the camera. That is called he is in charge of the drop, and he's the
Loadmaster?
Boat, yes. There's a special term, it's going to come to me. His name is Ian, and he just looked like he was living his best life standing on this open aircraft. I hear we were strapped in to these, tethered to these bungees. We were absolutely safe, but he just loves to work out there, you could tell. And what they do is they send food, supplies, equipment, perhaps equipment for a boat in distress. They can drop pumps down. They can, whatever, they can drop down. And so we saw them doing that, but they can also assist cutters in the water as they pursue the cartel who are poaching the snapper. Just last month, 4 Mexican fishermen pleaded guilty to being 18 miles north of the maritime boundary line, and they were in possession of almost 700 pounds of red snapper and 4 sharks.
Wow.
They also apparently get a lot of turtle, which they're not allowed to, pick up turtle. This was $9,000 worth of snapper, and they each faced 5 years in prison and hefty fines, $250,000. But you know what? Commander Elliott told me they are seeing kind of a decrease in the number of lancheros, fishermen, the lanchas that they're having to pursue. He believes it's because recently there have been court cases like this one I just mentioned. There was another one in April. There were 13 fishermen who pled guilty. Wow. And they are now getting U.S. prison sentences. So rather than just automatic repatriation back to Mexico, basically a slap on the wrist and then they turn around and just come right back. No, they're having to stay in a U.S. prison. And so he thinks, it's his personal opinion, it's sending a message. But he and his crew have noticed fewer boats out there. But, to spot a boat, to spot a Coke can in this vast amount of water, I mean, they go hundreds of miles every night. And the thing about the aircraft that they're on, they can fly for 7 hours without needing to refuel. Now, they can't hover like a helicopter, but they still can drop supplies. They still can alert the cutter down below. Let's say they can get to a spot in 25 minutes. That could take a cutter 2.5 hours through the choppy water. And honestly, Salvador went on the Pacific side, and he endured a lot of chop. We were in the air. It was a lot easier. Hot on the ground, stuffy until we got up high enough, then the air became a little clearer, right? Never sat in the jump seat in a cockpit with a pilot and a co-pilot before. That was kind of a new experience for me. Never stood on an aircraft as the hatch opened. Usually we're told, put your seat tray and your tables upright and,
Yeah, I can vouch for when you're wearing a uniform, the rules are much different on an aircraft like that.
But, a wonderful experience for us to see what they're doing. And once again, here they are, forefront, U.S. Coast Guard. They are helping to patrol these waters and to keep this. It's the economic investment zone that the United States have, and fishermen know that's where the U.S. Americans can fish. They can't fish there from Mexico. So working on that. He also says that these lancheros are historically known for being packed with immigrants who are being illegally trafficked, as well as drugs. Drugs is just a given. But the newest thing is red snapper. Kind of makes me question my menu choices.
Oh, yeah, it definitely does. Well, thank you so much for your reporting, Sandra. We appreciate you being here. Sandra Sanchez, South Texas correspondent. Stay with us. We'll be right back. And before we go, don't forget that you can stay informed on the stories shaping the U.S. Mexico border on your commute home or while at the gym or taking the dog out for a walk, as Border Report Live is now available to you in audio form on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the all-new iHeartRadio app. Before we go, we want to remind you to check out our partners at Political Power Ranker. It's a weekly show tracking the movers, shakers, and rulemakers in American politics using my favorite thing, data. This week, they're focusing on the Texas U.S. Senate race and redistricting with new polling from Emerson College. Make sure to check it out. You can find out more on Political Power Ranker at abc27.com. For the crew, my name is Rudy Mireles. See you on Monday.